Ghanim, Ghanim, we are going to look very forward, or we are looking very forward to hearing what you have to say tonight. So before I ask Sally to introduce Ghanim, there's some business that I have to take care of. This is a PASI meeting, and we are looking to form a nominating committee who will present a new slate to our membership in May, and they will take office in June. Without the membership committee, there wouldn't be a meeting like this tonight. There wouldn't be discussions, there wouldn't be events, there wouldn't be networking, there wouldn't be the Staten Island for the People Coalition. That was a proposal that was put forth by Sally, and the board backed her up. And today we have the Staten Island for the People, and we were looking forward to No King's Day on Saturday, No King's Day 3. So in order to be on the nominating committee, you must have paid your dues and be an official member, if you will, of PASI. It is a wonderful opportunity. It's a short-term commitment, and you come together with other people. We're looking for an odd number, and you put your heads together and come up with a slate of people that you think would be able to lead PASI. Chair, secretary, treasurer, and members at large. Yeah, as I said, it's a short-term commitment, but it can be very interesting, and you're going to bring, everybody knows somebody different. People can put their experience, their talents, their ability to good use. So, the PASI board is so committed. They bring so much, they offer so much, there's all their experience, their dedication, their commitment, and we really couldn't do it without them. So I'm going to ask, maybe the best way is, if you are interested in becoming, or being part of the nominating committee, you can put your name and contact information in the chat. All right? And I hope you'll seriously, PASI members, I hope you'll seriously consider being part of the nominating committee. It's also, it's exciting, it's interesting, and you just never know who you know and who somebody else knows. So again, please put your name and contact information in the chat. And at this time, then, I'm going to turn the meeting over to Sally Jones, who is our treasurer, and to introduce Ghanim. And welcome, Ghanim, and welcome everybody. Sally, you want to take? I think she's muted.
Yes, I'm on mute, but
Okay.
let's give people a moment to are we having any problems with sound? Sane put in something in the chat that he was having difficulty hearing. So please let us know so we can speak up.
Well, I hear noise. Not now. It's all clear now. And when you spoke, it cleared up. So I don't know what the problem was, but there was definitely something going on somewhere.
That's white noise. That's white noise from the person who was speaking before.
That
Okay.
wasn't white noise. That was noise.
Noise.
Yeah, it was, okay, whatever.
All right. Well, let's see. Let's get some more people in the chat. I see Shahana is going to be on the nominating committee. We need to get more people. This is important. Before we start, we're not going to start until we get the people we need for the nominating committee. So we've got 2, I think.
And also Soji, Sally, he's interested.
Oh, Soji, so that's 3. Yeah. That's pretty good.
Yeah, and yourself?
Yeah.
It's Eileen. Eileen is the problem.
I'm the problem?
There's something noisy about whenever you speak, the noise comes on.
Oh.
So maybe there's a plug or something, or maybe you got some dirt somewhere or
Oh,
something.
please.
Okay, so Joanna, we've got Joanna, we've got Shahana, we've got Sally, and we've got Soji. So that's 4 of us. We just need one more.
And I hear white noise on yours, Sal.
I put my name.
Is that
And
Zoom?
Mir, okay. Masuma's also. Okay, so is somebody writing this down?
Yes,
before
me.
You
I am.
are?
Yes, I
Okay,
certainly am.
great. Okay, thank you. If anybody else wants to join, sounds good. Okay, so I'm going to introduce Ghanim. Now, just before I do the official introduction, I just want to say that I met Ghanim back in 2003 when he was making the decision whether or not to go to be deployed to Iraq. And he made a very courageous decision. He was in the New York National Guard at the time. And I was very impressed by his courage because you never know what's going to happen when you make a decision like that. And thank goodness he was able to get out of the military, and he has had, for the last 20 some years, he's been outspoken against war and educated people in Staten Island and around, the New York area in universities and churches, talking about Islam in the West, Islamophobia, and issues around U.S. foreign policy. He's been a member of Historians Against the War, About Face, Veterans for Peace, and Peace Action of Staten Island. He lives here in Staten Island, has been for quite a while. He was born actually, though, I believe in London, anyway, in the UK, of Pakistani descent. And he's a veteran of the U.S. Marine Corps and the New York Army National Guard. He also loves nature, and if you go to his Facebook page, you'll see beautiful pictures that he often posts of the natural world on Staten Island.
Hoorah.
Yeah. So we are, I am honored to have him as a friend, and he's going to tonight to be addressing the rationales for the war on Iran and the separate and mutual interests of the U.S. and Israel in launching the war alongside the interests of Iran and its allies. He will address the internal struggles of the people of Iran, which are similar to the struggles happening in many Muslim countries. So let me pin you so people can see you, Ghanim, okay? And, we're honored to have you.
Thank you, Sally. That was a great introduction. I just want to clarify that I was born in South Yorkshire, England.
Okay.
But other than that, thank you very much for that gracious introduction. I want to get straight into it because we don't have a lot of time and time goes by quickly. But I just want to ask before I begin, at what time do you want me to conclude?
We'd like to have time for Q&A. So if you have, I don't know how much time, we talked a little bit about 20, 25 minutes for your talk, and then we use the rest of the time. We have till 7:30, I know, to have Q&A.
Okay.
How does that sound? Do you want to adjust those times?
I just want to expand it a little bit because I added things because of recent developments, but it won't go over I hope to be done by no more than 30 minutes.
Well, that's great.
Yeah.
Okay, that sounds great. All right, so I'm just going to go right into it. My name is Ghanim Khalil. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah wahdahu la sharika lahu wa ashhadu anna Muhammadan abduhu wa rasuluh. I'm going to make some preliminary remarks, and then I'm going to go over the purpose of the talk. Why am I here? Why am I saying these things? And then I'm going to go over the war in Iran and its various justifications. So the preliminary remarks, number one, is I am not a supporter of the government of Iran. So I want to make that clear. But I do support the right for countries to defend themselves when they're unjustly attacked. I oppose the policies of any nation or group that aims to create chaos or destabilization at the expense of peace and security. Preliminary remark number two, I'm not a nationalist. I don't believe in nationalism. I consider myself a follower of Islam, and Islam says humanity is one single family, divided by our different approaches and beliefs about reality and life. Islam, within that, promotes mutual understanding, peace, and security between people, and opposes social, religious, political, and economic oppression. Preliminary remark number three. I have 4 preliminary remarks. So I'm almost done. I'm halfway through. Iran is overwhelmingly considered a rational actor within the political science theories, whose international policy is led more by pragmatism and not necessarily theology or end-of-time scenarios. Even among the political opponent of Iran's government, there's acknowledgement that Iranian leadership is nothing like the Mad Mullah stereotypes that pervade Western media and popular culture. That is not serious discussion about Iran when you stereotype people. Preliminary remark number 4. Iran is not strictly a theocracy. I know that's a cliche, but it is not true. It is a modern hybrid system of government that combines democracy and republicanism under the umbrella of Shia Islamic principles. The leading Ayatollah is like the Supreme Court justice, how a Supreme Court justice would be in Western countries, who deliberates and ultimately decides on certain matters. But national politics has many levels, and a lot occurs without the involvement of the leader. So he's more of a spiritual guide, and he only intervenes in certain matters. So now that the preliminary remarks are done with, I'm going to go into what the purpose of this talk is. I'm going to briefly review the multiple explanations for the war in Iran, beginning with the chronological timeline of important events and occurrences between Iran and other nations, modern Iran and other nations, and how they have brought us to the present moment. I will focus on how long recycled anti-Islam views play a major role in justifying the war in Iran, and will likely play a major role in justifying future conflicts. I offer a critique of anti-Islam views by highlighting what scholar John Esposito terms as secular fundamentalism, and the renowned anthropologist Talal Assad calls secular liberal sensibilities concerning Western double standards about violence. That is very, very, very important to understanding why it's okay to initiate wars against Muslim countries. But first, let's do a reflective thought exercise. Imagine a world dominated by Islamic imperial powers who had recently retreated from violently colonizing the Western world, murdering tens of millions of people, but then ironically followed up by creating a global human rights structure like the UN, revolving around Islamic principles and ethics, where alcohol, prostitution, drugs, adultery, usury, pornography, paganism, gambling, and the absence of formalized charity were designated major universal human rights violations that were then politicized in order to control, sanction, intervene, and make war upon Western countries. So just imagine that. Would that be okay? What if the Westerners who resisted this world order were then mischaracterized, at the very least, turned barbaric, backward, or monolithically labeled as Western and Christian fundamentalist, and at most, militant extremists and terrorists bent on bringing back the Dark Ages, bringing back witch burnings, and anti-science world empire? Would this be fair? Would this be a fair assessment? So just keep that scenario in mind as I go through the chronology of modern Iran. So I begin in the 1800s, because this is very important. The Irani Qajar dynasty, Qajar is Qajar in most spellings, dynasty, which is where Persia was, Iran is caught between the British Empire to the west and the Russian Empire to the north. And those two empires are gradually gaining territory in Iran. During this time, the Qajar rulers initiate a major reform process which modernizes the military, modernizes the education system and infrastructure in order to counter the great game of aggression from Britain and Russia, which sought to neutralize the country and bring it under Western domination. Foreign influence demanded various concessions that were granted at the expense of the Iranian people, which later culminated in a strong nationalist movement. Zooming all the way to 1906, a mass constitutional movement arose in Iran among the clergy and merchant classes that eventually established a majlis, which would be equivalent to, in the West, it would be like a parliament, that granted various rights to the people and reduced the power of the ruler. But this was later overturned when Russia and Britain succeeded in dividing the country into different spheres of influence, north versus south. By 1914, the Russians controlled North Iran and the British controlled the south, after violently suppressing Majlis representatives and supporters in what was termed by a British ambassador, George Barclay, as a reign of terror. So they executed, tortured, imprisoned many of the people who were part of the parliament. By 1925, that's after World War I, the British Empire helped establish the Shah, called Shah Reza Khan, who ended the Qajar dynasty and proclaimed himself as the new Persian monarch. The promised power was largely weakened. The Shah embarked upon a modernization scheme that included the enforcement of Western culture and secularism on the Iranian people. He was replaced with his son Muhammad Reza by the British in 1941. So when he wasn't doing a good job, they replaced him with a worse person, his son. By 1951, national sentiments arose again, and constitutional fervor was at its heights. And that's where Muhammad Mossadegh, who opposed the Shah in 1923 initially, became prime minister. And his plan was to nationalize their oil, which was being usurped by the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company. The British followed up with a blockade on Iranian oil and lodged a complaint in the UN. So you exploit the country for many decades, you take control of the oil, most of the profits go to you, it doesn't serve the people of Iran, and then when Iran takes control of their own resources, you lodge a complaint in the United Nations. How terrible, that is. The embargo led to a major financial crisis in Iran. So embargo in other Western countries, they embargoed Iran, and that led to a major financial crisis. In 1953, the second Shah, Muhammad Reza, the son, was established via a coup led by the UK and US, and the coup is termed Operation Ajax. He continued his father's authoritarian modernization agenda and was considered the world's worst human rights violator by the 1970s. So this was a really, really bad guy. In the 1960s, just to go back, the U.S. helped Iran establish its first nuclear facility with the uranium enrichment for civilian use. So that was introduced first by President Eisenhower and then by succeeding presidents. So they gave Iran the ability to enrich uranium. But by 1979, the Iranian Revolution ended centuries of monarchy and established an Islamic republic. The Western world condemned the revolution as a major loss in the Cold War against communism, and a loss to Islam and Muslims reasserting themselves on their own terms and interests. From 1980 to 1988, the U.S. supported Saddam in his war with Iran, even providing chemical strains used to deploy chemical weapons against Iran, which is now understood to have been a policy to deplete the power and influence of both countries. As Kissinger once said, I hope they both lose. So this was a plan to reduce the influence and power of both Iran and Iraq. In 1984, the U.S. labeled Iran a major sponsor of international terrorism. Why? Because it supported Palestinian and Lebanese resistance to Israel. By 1995, the U.S. introduced severe sanctions that lasted to this day. In 1988, the U.S. shot down an Iranian civilian aircraft, killing 290 people. There were no real consequences for that act of mass murder. In 2002, the U.S. labeled Iran a member of the Axis of Evil. This was after September 11, with the global war on terror context, seeking to form a greater anti-Iran alliance around the world as part of its war on terrorism national strategy. From the 2003 war of aggression against Iraq till the present, the U.S. blamed Iran for destabilizing Iraq via terrorist attacks on American and occupational forces, despite the overwhelming majority of the attacks being carried out by Sunni militants, not Shia militants or groups. Also in 2003, this is when Ayatollah Ali Khamenei issues a binding fatwa declaring the production and use of nuclear weapons as Islamically unlawful. The Iranian leadership implemented this fatwa as a serious political policy. Post-2003, the US and its allies began establishing major military bases in the countries surrounding Iran. So Afghanistan, Iraq, and other countries. Since 2007, Israel and the US have committed several terrorist attacks within Iran. These included supporting terror groups like Jundullah in 2005 and MEK, M-E-K, since 2012. That included assassinations of Iranian nuclear scientists and high-level military and political officials. Now imagine if we did that. In 2018, the US withdrew from a major, unprecedented nuclear deal with Iran, throwing out all sense of security for multiple countries in the region. So the Arab countries were, caught off guard. Western, NATO countries were caught off guard. Afghanistan, Pakistan, India, they were caught off guard. Russia, China. So all those countries were caught off guard. And by 2020, the US assassinated Iranian General Qasem Soleimani. And this attack was a violation of international law because it created a major incident within Iran and in the surrounding countries, especially Iraq. In June of 2025, Israel launched its attacks against Iran during an ongoing US-Iranian negotiation over its nuclear programming. And they did so by using infiltration agents to destabilize Iranian society and openly call for insurrection. The attacks failed to start an insurrection, and Iranian counterstrikes were considered a setback in Israel. In August 2025, the US launched its own strikes against Iranian nuclear sites in what is now widely believed to have been carried out to placate Israel and restart negotiations with Iran. They even warned Iran we were going to target these areas to get the people out. By December of 2025, this is last year, US Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent engineered the Iranian financial crisis that caused violent national protests in Iran. He initially caused a dollar shortage, degrading the Iranian rial, or intentionally caused that. Bessent announced the US role in causing the crisis in February 2026. During the Iranian protests, former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo and Israeli intelligence indicated CIA Mossad infiltration of Iranian protests and urged the violent overthrow of the Iranian government. This is while the protests were happening. The Iranian government then responded to national protests with strong force, killing up to the estimates rate from 3,000 people to 40,000 people, but serious estimates after investigations are that it was about approximately 5,000 people. And Iran justified its actions as a national security threat from external infiltration and intervention, similar to what happened in Syria, Libya, Iraq, and Lebanon. So we have the example of those four countries where intervention and insurrection and outside involvement toppled those governments. And so Iran is looking at the example of those governments and responding according to what happened there. Massive counter-protests were largely ignored in the Western media, creating a sense that Iranian government was universally hated by the people and critically fragile. That's a very important to make, because later I'm going to talk about why Israel was really upset. Like recently, Benjamin Netanyahu made it public that he was very upset with the Mossad chief. This was just a few days ago. He was upset that Mossad failed to infiltrate and initiate violence within the protesters, and so the government wasn't toppled. So he's admitting that, there were people on the ground, Mossad, who were trying to create violence so that there would be a response from the Iranian government, and then the more people would come out and protest that violence, but it failed, and he expressed his disappointment. In February of 2026, US and Israel launched an all-out war on Iran using failed negotiations as a pretext, as protests failed to overthrow the Iranian leadership. And a point must be made that the Omani negotiation leadership said that they had just made a breakthrough in negotiations, and then not too long later, I think it was like 32 hours, 36 hours, the U.S. and Israel panicked, and they went all out war on the Iranian government. So that's just a chronology, just to keep in your head, that this didn't start yesterday. This started a while ago. So foreign intervention is embedded in the psyche of the Iranian people. And so that's why Iran is the way it is. And that's why you can never defeat Iran. They're so strong psychologically. After going through decades, their grandparents and great-grandparents went through, and their parents went through, and now the youth are going through, all of this intervention that does nothing but create chaos in Iran. And so they have this recent modern history. Now, what are the reasons for war? The war in Iran is not a religious war. Judaism, Christianity, and Islam don't advocate wars of aggression in their primary sacred texts. The religious language used to justify political violence is an example of manipulating the sacred texts to carry out irreligious political and economic goals led by extreme nationalism. Nationalism is antithetical to most religions. The war on Iran is a joint Israeli and American national interest war in the ongoing purpose of regional and global hegemony. Lots of books have been written about this, with Iran as the focus. For Israel, this includes the Zionist agenda of establishing the dream of Greater Israel in order to once and for all cement its existence in the region as a major military and economic power. It needs continuous assistance from the U.S. to accomplish this goal, and it gets it. For the U.S., the objective in attacking Iran seems to be to protect Israeli and Arab monarchy national interests and create a power vacuum in an effort to promote another color revolution. Many political analysts believe the Trump regime thought murdering the leadership of Iran would collapse the power structure like it did in Libya and allow people to take over the country. And now you can look at the state of Libya now. This entire policy is based on myths about the leadership and people of Iran. And so the US and Israel are now stuck in a major military quagmire. It's noteworthy to point out that international law was always, in this regard, and since Gaza, international law was always a tool for powerful nations to punish less powerful nations for acting outside the international order dictated by Western countries. Lots of books have also been written about that. This is why absolutely nothing was done about the genocide of Gaza or the ethnic cleansing of the West Bank, and now the Israeli annexation of Lebanon and parts of Syria. That's why international law doesn't do anything about it. International law has been far more politically and morally objectionable for Iran to retaliate militarily, but not as objectionable that the US and Israel started the war, that is targeting schools, hospitals, vital infrastructure, and protected historical cultural sites. Do you remember that church in France that burned down, was burning down? I mean, everybody knows about that, right? But there are dozens of culturally, historically protected cultural sites in Gaza.
And in Iran.
In Iran now. They're semi-destroyed or completely destroyed. But the global, or I should say, the Western world's outcry is completely absent. And that's one highlight of many, many highlights of why international law just is a double standard. Now, I'm going to go quickly into the role of demonization in the war. Keep in mind that thought exercise we did in the beginning as I'm going through this. To justify Israeli and American objectives, two things have been historically and ideologically necessary. The first is projecting Islam and practicing Muslims as existential threats to civilization. I mean, this has been the case. Edward Said wrote a book called Covering Islam, where he goes into this a little bit. But since the Crusades, Islam has always been seen as an existential crisis for whatever European empire and now the West. So that's the first. The second is projecting false imminent threats that offer moral justifications while providing military authorization for a war of aggression in the guise of a necessary war for civilization. So not only are Muslims or Islam is an existential threat, it's always on the verge of imminently attacking the West, attacking civilization. So those two things is what justifies making war upon people. Not just making war upon people, making war upon the children of Muslim countries, the women of Muslim countries, the disabled of Muslim countries, not just men. So all of this was the case for war post 9/11 on Iraq and Afghanistan. Think back, if you remember, if you're old enough to remember, what the justifications were. And major military intervention in Libya and Syria was also, these things were used to justify. And altogether, the global war on terrorism has killed over 1 million Muslims. That's a very conservative number. People say it's 3 or 4 million. I'm being very conservative with my numbers. And it has led up to approximately 21 million refugees worldwide. This is also the case of, the committing genocide and ethnic cleansing of Palestine. Islam is always the threat. And Israelis are very open about that. Americans speak about it through a filter. A potent component of the demonization of Islam Muslims to such a degree that it justifies genocide, ethnic cleansing, torture, terrorism, designed mass starvation, and civil insurrection is the utilization of secular fundamentalist narratives that paints Muslim theology, society, and history as uncivilized, archaic, static, monolithic, irrational, immoral, and conducive to oppression. Most of all, Islam is represented as a threat, not just to Israel, and hence the US, but to the entire world. And if extraterrestrial aliens were to visit us in the near future, Islam would also be portrayed as a threat to them. Maybe that's why they haven't invaded yet, because they watch too much Western media and fear Muslims will declare jihad on them. So maybe that's a good thing they haven't invaded, But if they were to invade, even they would be convinced. So over 25 years ago, Edward Said wrote a book that I mentioned before called Covering Islam. And in the book, he shows how the media represents Islam. And so that ordinary people, think this is all this stuff is true. But just a couple of quotes from his book. He writes, only Islam seemed to never have submitted completely to the West. And whereas most other great cultural groupings appear to have accepted the United States' role, its hegemony, it is only from within the Islamic world that signs of determined resistance are still strong. Therefore, we have an efflorescence of cultural and religious attacks on Islam from individuals and groups whose interests are informed with the idea of the West and the United States as its leader as the standard for enlightened modernity. So the West is the standard. Everybody who doesn't meet that standard is backward and inferior. And they require Western intervention in order to change them. And this is a general assumed thing even within academia, not just news media and popular myths. Many people in the West resist the idea that secularism could ever play a negative role or destructive role in the world. If you want to understand secularism comprehensively, comprehensive secularism, study the work of the influential philosopher Charles Taylor. Study the work of the phenomenal philosopher Talal Asad, who I mentioned before. You can't do a serious study on secularism until you become familiar with the works of those two people. Anyway, to continue, the response to this, that secularism is that secularism seeks to detach the human self from the divine in a way that inverts their relationship. So the human self and ego is elevated above the divine prerogative and therefore is set aside. In modern political theory, God is replaced by the nation state, which becomes the sole source of power and law. Morality becomes useful only in its pragmatic function for the interests of the nation, aka the people in power. So not the common people necessarily, but really the business interests, the corporate interests, and the power and initial interests of the people in power. Also, what's called negative secularism, what it does is it divorces technology from morality. This is a major point made by the Jewish intellectual Zygmunt Bauman in his work termed Liquid Modernity, where he studies modernity. And he makes the crucial argument he was a survivor of the Holocaust. He makes the crucial argument that the modern world, at the center of it, is the divorce between morality and technology, where technology is pursued without moral considerations. And so he compares that with how Nazis carried out the Holocaust, but in a very pragmatic and scientific way. And so his thesis revolves around that. And you should check him out. He's a very brilliant theorist and thinker. This is why genocide and wars of aggression against others are okay, as long as the mission is to civilize people. For Muslims, this isn't only an attack on Islam, it's an attack on the human self and the soul. So you can't possibly expect Muslims to follow the same road that has led to the predominance of secularism. And the roots of secularism, according to Talal Asad and many other thinkers, is the history of Europe. The history of Europe went through a crisis of identity several times, since the Reformation. One example is the conflict between science and religion. Another one is the conflict between the West and the non-West, where people defined why the non-West was inferior and the West was, superior to them, or the example of the shining light of global human civilization. Another crisis is the conflict between men and women and the establishment of gender identity. I can go on with other examples. I'm just going to continue because I just looked at the time. So the West always seeks to civilize the non-West, but the non-West never really had those conflicts, and secularism never really played the role that it does in the West. For Muslims, I'll just go over what John Esposito said about this when it comes to Muslims. John Esposito is a celebrated professor of religion and international affairs. I believe he's still at Georgetown University in Washington, D.C. He writes that the post-Enlightenment tendency to define religion as a system of belief restricted to personal or private life rather than as a way of life has seriously hampered our ability to understand the nature of Islam and many of the world's religions. Secular presuppositions which inform our academic disciplines and outlook on life, our Western secular worldview, have been a major obstacle to our understanding and analysis of Islamic politics, and have contributed to a tendency to reduce Islam to fundamentalism, and fundamentalism to religious extremism. One of the leading anthropologists who I mentioned earlier, again, several times, Talal Asad, rightfully points out, why is it that aggression in the name of God shocks secular liberal sensibilities, whereas the act of killing in the name of the secular nation or of democracy does not? This is the type of approach to violence that allows secular nations to absolve themselves of evil, despite doing things that are much worse in scale and significance than any non-secular state in modern history. The same is true for the secular approach to women's rights in Muslim countries. The oppression of Muslim women in Western liberal democracies is seen as a failure to assimilate to liberal society. But in Muslim countries, the oppression of women is almost always caused to target Islam. Even if Islam opposes the popular forms of oppression, it's often erroneously blamed for. So many Muslim countries have oppressive laws against women that are not rooted in the Quran or the Hadith or Islam or Islamic scholarship, pre-modern Islamic scholarship, so traditional Islamic scholarship. But Islam always gets blamed. But when women can't wear hijab in Western countries, they can't attend universities, and they can't be elected, and they can't run businesses, and they can't do a multitude of things. That's not because Western civilization, that's not because of secularism, that's not because of liberalism. It's because those women have failed to assimilate in our society. So this is the double standard that Talal Asad is referencing. When Westerners gaze upon the Muslim world, they do so through the lens of their own insecurities and beliefs about religion and history. They're mostly unaware that Islam and religious Muslim authorities didn't play the anti-science and anti-human rights role that European empires, kings, and popes became known for. That did not exist in Islam. There were no dark ages in the Muslim world. There was no conflict between science and Islam and human rights, were sought and defended through the Sharia. Now, this is a very crucial point. I'm not saying this just from an Islamic point of view. Most of my sources for this are Western thinkers. The Sharia was the means that ordinary Muslims used to defend their rights against state empirical power. It wasn't outside philosophical or scientific institutions that led that fight. It was the clerical class, the religious experts, and they often paid with their lives. The most popular Muslim scholars all went to jail for defending the rights of the people. And this is well known in Islamic studies if you ever take a course in it. Religious education included mathematics, science, literature, theology, and law. So most of the religious scholars studied math, science, and literature, and theology and law. Most of the well-known philosophers, historians, and poets were also the world's leading religious scholars. So like Ibn Khaldun, Ibn Sina, Ibn Tufayl, Imam Ghazali, they had a good grasp of philosophy, the arts, literature, science, and in that way, a lot of them were polymaths. There's even a book called The Polymath of Islam. The distrust that many Westerners have about Islamic governance comes from media misrepresentations of Sharia and the equating of extremist groups with mainstream Islam. Keep in mind that human rights existed before 1492, when the New World was discovered, or 1776, with the birth of democracy, in the United States. So just think for a moment. The critical, significant thesis of most Western media and intellectuals has been that the non-West needs the West to survive. We need to educate them. They only differ on whether there should be military violence to change things or there should be economic and cultural and social and media and political pressure to make those changes. They do not examine the underlying roots of that twisted thinking, that they really believe that human rights didn't exist before Europe invented it, that philosophy didn't exist, that even history didn't exist. These people don't know their history. Science didn't exist. So, and they actually believe that, and that's the assumption that children are educated in Western countries until they go to college, and then they, have a mental crisis about it. It was during the era of Western colonialism and imperialism when religious and political narratives about Islam and Muslims revolved around frameworks of knowledge that aimed to prove the inherent cultural superiority of the Western civilization to all others in order to justify mass violence. It was out of this production of knowledge and justification of horrifying cruelty and the standards of Western modernity came into being to measure the humanity of the Muslim world. Whether it was done through colonialism or imperialism or through modernization theory, the IMF, or the United Nations, Muslims have endured the violence of the civilized, modern, secular West in the name of human rights, peace, and freedom. It's like getting a well-made cake, on your birthday with all your favorite flavors, and then finding out it's filled with allergens meant to keep you sick. That's what it's like. The modernization standards demanded from Muslims to abandon Islam and Muslim principles and embrace Westernization and become thankful consumers of all the things that are destroying the planet. We're expected to become modern and civilized so that we can grow up in the wonderful world of supporting the private and privileged interests of rich and powerful as they degrade the environment. We're expected to become distracted and bedazzled by the dramatic lives of celebrities and waste our evenings watching reality TV and take on the habits of hedonism and wastefulness, and then seek help for the mental illness that all this produces. Despite all of these apparent problems plaguing the Free West, political and news narratives, media and cinema representations, and academic presentations, and popular culture and literature are full of assumptions about the superiority of Western civilization and the need for Muslims to disconnect from their religion. It's the Muslims who need help, not us. disconnect from their religion, their history, their value system, and embrace the secular worldview of materialism. The Iranian Revolution of 1979, just to take it back to Iran, and I'm circling back now, is often represented as an irrational reaction to modernity and the victory of fundamentalist Muslims against civilization and progress. This reductionist understanding tries to conceal the reality that the Iranian people had morally legitimate, long-standing grievances against the Shah and his Western supporters, who installed a tyrant who was one of the greatest human rights violators. One has to omit a great deal of evidence about the Western role in Iran previous to 1979 that led to the revolution and its anti-imperialist self-identity in order to maintain the false narratives about Iranian history, culture, and society. To sum up, because I'm almost out of time. To sum up, there's an additional problem I want to address. Too many people in the Western world who value peace, tolerance, justice, freedom, good people, in my opinion, prefer to elevate and lionize Muslim voices which align with their own worldview, but ignore or dismiss the vast majority of Muslim voices that don't. The more a Muslim reflects the Western worldview and their cultural sensibilities and goals in life, the more human and civilized that Muslim is considered, regardless of how many other Muslims choose the Islamic worldview. Many Westerners, and these are examples, are familiar with the neo-Orientalist authors of the book called, Reading Lolita and Tehran, or the comic book style work Persepolis, but don't know anything about those Iranian female authors like Fatima Kashavaras, who have exposed these authors for distorting Islam, distorting Iranian history and society, and the lives of women. Furthermore, many people are familiar with, Malala Yousafzai, but have never heard of the Yemeni journalist, politician, human rights leader, and Nobel Peace Prize winner, Tawakkol Karman, who's Yemeni, because she
Okay, Ghanim, you froze a little bit. You'll probably be back. Well, let's give it a minute. You may have an internet issue. He's not coming. Oh, there you go. You were frozen for a minute. Just want to let you know.
Oh my goodness! How much did you miss?
Maybe 30 seconds.
30 seconds. I'm just going to read the last paragraph, okay? Many
Okay.
From the Yemeni scholar's name, and then you missed after that.
Okay. So many people are familiar with Malala Yousafzai, but have never heard of the Yemeni journalist, politician, human rights leader, and Nobel Peace Prize winner, Tawakkol Karman, because she is overtly religious, wears a hijab, and frames her activism within Islamic principles. So now, just to conclude, with everything that I've said, the types of Muslims are what Mahmoud Mamdani, in his book, Good Muslim, Bad Muslim, says, the type of Muslims that are acceptable in the eyes of the West are those who are okay with bombing Western countries. They are okay with Western sensibilities, Western outlook on life. But those people who dare to express themselves as Muslims from the Quranic point of view or from the Islamic point of view, they're not worthy of our attention or focus. And this is a double standard only known in the Muslim world. It's very difficult to articulate this and have it acceptable to a lot of Westerners, where they have to reflect on these double standards. And so I purposely today talked about secular fundamentalism as one of the root causes of justification of war on the Muslim world. And these wars are going to continue. This is just the beginning. Not to sound like a pessimist, I'm more of a realist, but you will see more of the Islam bashing and justification of why we need to kill the children on the other side of the world, why that's okay to do, with very mute objections from the UN. So unfortunately, this is what it's come to. And so I do want to leave a lot of room, a lot of time for questions and answers, but I wanted to give you food for thought when I address some of those issues. So hopefully what I've done is, I haven't really insulted or degraded anybody. What I've done is I've introduced a subject that most people don't directly hear from Muslims. And I've done that with the intention of breaking you out of that shell that the Muslim world really needs liberalism to be good humans. This is absolutely not true. And so with that, I just want to end.
Thank you so much. Now, before we open up the Q&A, I just want to say we have a half hour left. And I think that if you ask a question, please mute yourself if you're, please mute yourself. Okay, that's good. Okay, so keep your question as a question briefly, and so that we get to hear more from Ghanim. And then we can do follow-ups. We plan on having additional meetings, with maybe other speakers or whatever, but keep it to a question, and make sure that it is respectful. And I am the moderator, so I'm tough. So, you don't believe that, but I really am. So and when you want to make a question, they're in the React. At the bottom of your screen, you'll see something called raise hand, like I'm just raising your hand. Jacqueline just raised her hand, okay? And then you'll get on board. That is the best way for me to see you. And then I can let you come in and ask your question. Okay, Jacqueline, please unmute and ask your question.
Shukran Katir for the beautiful presentation. I was fortunate to live in Jordan, where I was teaching at a university I still have a place there for over 20 years. And one of my research projects was I discovered in Sharia and in Islamic law and tradition, deep respect for the environment. And that I feel that the Islamic voice on the care of the environment and the responsibility we have to our environment is never paid attention to. Second question is the Shia Sunni dispute. Jordan, is Sunni and Iran is Shia, so they don't like each other a lot. And I was wondering how that conflict, particularly with the Gulf countries, is going to play into the problems of a unified Islam and peace in the Middle East.
Thank you. So as for the first point, the scholar Sayyid Hussein Nasser has been talking about Islamic environmental principles since the 1950s, I believe. And he is very old now, but I have a few of his books on environmentalism. Islam and ecology is one of them. As for your second point, this conflict between Sunni and Shia, and there are other sects too, these are modern conflicts. That's okay. So historically, the Sunni and Shia conflict have only been periodically problematic. Most of the conflict has played over religious and theological texts. This guy running a text and the other guy responding to the text, and that going on for centuries almost. And sometimes when political dynasties or empires or states rise and fall, there's a conflict. But the real major conflict of the modern world is due to the separation of these different states because of the Sykes-Picot agreement and the British coming in and dividing these territories according to religious and cultural divisions. Before that, take Iraq for example. Before Iraq became like a main problem with this nuclear, the fake nuclear weapons that they had, the Sunni and Shia intermarried to a great degree in Iraq and Lebanon, even in Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, like they intermarried. Same thing in Iran and Pakistan. But once the Iraq War happened and the United States got involved, it played them in Britain, and NATO played Sunnis against Shia, and Sunnis and Shia against Kurd, and Kurd against everybody else, including Turks. And so the reason why a lot of books are written about this separation between Sunni and Shia today is because of the Iraq War. Before that, there was relative peace between, not religious harmony, but there was relative peace between Sunni and Shia for the most part, but only on occasion did it flare up due to political reasons.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, so Masoom, please unmute and please ask your question.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much. It was a wonderful discussion. I never had this discussion before. Few perspectives as also. I came from Bangladesh and we never had an issue with the Shia Sunni. I never. Until I came to this country under 79 up to 81. Then I see the different divisions. So my question is that, is it a creation by the Western world that Shia Sunni fight? Number two, the history you gave about the Iran since 1700. This is wonderful ideas. Is it taught in Iran education? The reason is that in my country we have huge issues of 71, Bangladesh, India, Pakistan. But after with divisions, we did not have this the kind of education history of us. So we forget our past. If we forget our past and then new is, like Western concept comes in and we start fighting. So is this this system is history is being taught in Iran. So people see the pattern of history coming back and forth with the West, how they destroy their country. Thank you.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. You made 2 points. The first point is, did the West create the conflict between Shia and Sunni? No, it's a historical conflict because go back all the way to the blessed Sahaba of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the companions of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. However, the conflict wasn't as passionate or didn't inflame tensions in a fluid way as it is sometimes thought to. It only rises on occasion, like I said with the other question from before. So whenever there's a political reason to inflare conflict, those with the greatest authority can instigate those conflicts and then portray that as an essentialist conflict that always existed and that these people always killed each other, which is not true at all. As to your second point, much of the education, not just the Muslim world, but also the Western free world, education is very politicized, especially primary school, secondary school. So what do I mean by politicized? The curriculum of most nations only teach that what they think they should embed in the citizenry of their country so that they can make productive citizens, not citizens who are critical of the government, not citizens who are useless to the government. So the education is always around a curricula that sort of mythologizes its past. And this is true with every country. It's even true with pre-modern societies. This is just the way things have been taught. However, once you free yourself from that, so a lot of times people free themselves from that when they come to college. When they free themselves from that, they are exposed to alternative views. And if they pursue those inquiries that they have of alternative views, that's when they, realize that their national history, their national education was a tiny bit of reality. It's a distortion of reality most of the times. And so hopefully people go into a state of mind where they can challenge their own history continuously and grow from that and learn new things and become a little bit more just to themselves and to their own people.
Exactly.
That's great. So Dave, do you want to unmute and ask your question?
Absolutely right. I'm totally with him.
It's more than just a question, because I think the idea that it's a cultural war and not an imperialist war, and that it's an anti-religious war, because it's happening all over the world in countries of whatever they believe in, from Vietnam. I mean, I have friends who were in Vietnam during the war who didn't want to be there. So this is not a new thing. This is U.S. imperialism. That now they're going into Iran, and whatever they're doing is wrong. There's nothing good about this bombing, but to think that this is because of their religion, when their government has you compare it to the France where they banned the hijab, they can kill you, and they have the present government if you don't wear it. There was a big 79 protests. 100,000 women took to the streets, and they were ignored. Then in 22 to the present, people have been fighting women, but it's also unions are banned. They're another country like the U.S. is headed to. So to think that we can be against U.S. imperialism and their invasions all over without necessarily supporting the government in the other place.
Yeah, do you remember my preliminary remark number 1? So you don't have to support the governments of these countries.
I don't support women being oppressed. I don't support workers not having a right to have a union.
Okay.
This is not anything, and you're saying that's just the religion? There are a lot of Muslims who don't believe in that. There are a lot of people, but they're nobody else's. The public things that they've been doing is that, and you hardly mentioned Mossadegh, who was overthrown by the CIA.
Yeah, I did mention it. Operation
You
Angel.
mentioned it, but this was somebody who wasn't there, and people went back after the Shah was overthrown. A friend of ours went back. He got killed because he was the Tudeh, which was a working class communist group that was fighting with the Muslim, with the clerics. And those people were killed.
Okay, so when I went through the chronology, I balanced it out with the rest of my talking points. So I didn't go through incredible detail about Mossadegh or how he even rose to power and how he resigned, actually. Even before he was overthrown, he resigned. So there are many details like that.
Because he was in New York City getting cancer treatment.
Oh, that's the Shah.
Yeah.
That's the Shah.
No. Mossadegh also, he had cancer. He died in prison. But he died in an Iranian prison. You can see the pictures when he was caught. He's skinny, and you can tell he has no hair on his head. So he also died of cancer. You bring up some important points, but a lot of my information comes from the U.S. Institute of Peace, and there are a few scholars on there. The stuff that's published that they published online is pre-Trump, so some of it's updated, but a lot of it's pre-Trump. And I deliberately did not play into those stereotypes where you use example here, example there to paint the whole rulership of Iran as just a bunch of tyrants who are mad and crazy. If you study Native American history and European settlers, the colonialists that settled here, and arguments they made against Native Americans, they could have easily, like you have said, and they did say, don't you know that they scalp people like other Native American tribes and Westerners who are just peaceful? We should be morally obligated to be against that. Of course, most Native Americans were against that, but that's not the point. When you take small examples like that, and then you say, oh, but we also have to do this. We also have to, oppose the government there like this and this way. What you're doing is you're etch-a-sketching your own picture of the reality down there. So let me paint.
I don't support the Iran government. I do support the Iran workers and women.
I was saying the opposite.
And people fighting, and the minorities who are also oppressed there, just like the Indians were here. The minorities in Iran.
Now, to what
You're leaving that out too? By the government. The government is another fascist government, just like ours.
it's not a fascist government. Do you know how the politics works in Iran? Do you know? Most people don't know. They just say fascist this, fascist that, dictatorship this, dictatorship that. They really don't know how it works. Like, you don't know how the government works there. Before 1979, less than 20% of women were educated. And the country has been modernizing since the 1920s. But less than 25%, I think it was, women were educated. As soon as the Ayatollah took over, he made a bunch of statements on how we need women to be educated. We need them in the workforce. But we also need to mind that most women, like most Muslim women today, they also want to have children. And so what they did was they balanced the right to have children, which is a right in Islamic law that has to be protected, with how to incorporate them in the workforce that doesn't suppress their right to have children, and not just have children, but take care of them for at least during the weaning periods and the first initial periods where, you know, the child and the mother is born. But after 1979, the education rate for women rose to 85%. Most university students are women, about 60%, I think it is. Most of the sciences, the engineering and the medical sciences are overwhelmingly women and women graduates. And so you have to look at the complete picture and not just pick on, oh, this woman who wore a hijab was killed. Actually, there is no sentence in Iranian law, and I've reviewed Iranian law, the statutes and everything. There's no law that says you execute a woman because she was wearing a hijab. There's no law. People die when authority is exercised in an oppressive manner, in an irresponsible, oppressive manner. And that happens in every country. So I'm not going to include every single detail because I can't guess what people are going to be upset about or guess what people are going to say or say, oh, you didn't mention this. I'm not doing an encyclopedic speech. The point of my speech was to cover why too many people in the West, justify attacking Iran, bombing Iran. And a lot of those people that are pro, we don't want to wear the hijab, their representatives are pro-war. The author of Reading Lolita in Tehran, which is very famous and is taught in universities, and she's very famous and goes everywhere and has talks, she's pro-war. She was in bed with the neoconservatives during the Iraq War. The author of Persepolis, the comic book that is very popular among the youth here and is also taught in universities, she openly said you need to bomb Iran. She only objected recently, a few days ago, to the bombing of the infrastructure, like the electricity and gas. She didn't even say, don't bomb the people. She said, we need the electricity and the gas for when we come and take over. But she didn't say anything about, like, the school bombing of all those children that died. A lot of these people that you guys, I shouldn't say you guys, but a lot of Westerners support, that they all love freedom and they don't want to wear hijab, and so they're so great. They're very pro-war people. You should look into them.
Okay, we have another question. That was a good back and forth, I think, because that's what we want to do here. We want to really get this discussion, and we can't be afraid of it. And I really am glad that everybody spoke. So Jim Anderson has a question in the chat. Should I read it, or Jim, do you want to unmute and ask it? Let's see if he's...
Thanks, Sally. I'm loving this discussion as well. And my thought was, what is Saudi Arabia's relationship, and why is it thus so with Iran? And the other was whether or not the CIA is actually on the ground in Iran at this time.
Two questions. The first question is the relation between Saudi Arabia and Iran. It's the conflict revolves around political ambitions. Saudi Arabia wants to be the leader of the Arab crew of all those nations, and Iran thwarts its strategic, domestic, and international policy. How does it do that? It supports the Shia in Iraq, the Shia population in Iraq. And so Iraq was Sunni, and now it's mostly led by Shia. And that was a setback, political setback. Same thing with Lebanon, same thing with Palestine. Iran is constantly a thorn in the side of Saudi Arabia because they constantly point out the hypocrisies of that monarchical government. And when they do that on the international stage, Saudi Arabia loses political clout. Saudi Arabia wants to maintain an image, especially to the Western world, where they're loosening some of the restrictions they have on the people and inviting Western investments. So basically, it's mostly economic and political.
Yeah.
It's all about investments and money. Saudi Arabia really doesn't.
No problem. I was going to remind you about the
Oh, wait.
section
Somebody
thing
needs to
of,
mute. Hold on.
it's about to end. I gotta go.
Oh, he was on the phone.
Okay.
Oh, who was he on the phone with? I want to know. I'm just kidding. So it's economic.
Do you hear me now? Do
Yeah.
you hear me?
I'll try to mute them. Give me a second.
Sure.
No,
sorry.
I'm not on the phone. Do you hear me now?
Yeah, we can hear you.
We have to mute you because we're in the middle of conversation. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So the conflict between Iran and much of the monarchical Arab countries is rooted in economics and politics. The second question, I forgot what the second question was. Could you remind me?
Second was whether the CIA is actually on the ground in Iran right now.
The CIA and Mossad, and some analysts say other countries too, their intelligence agencies, have been in the ground in Iran at least since 2005 when they helped Jundullah, the terrorist group Jundullah, and the terrorist group Mek in recruiting Iranians in those groups to identify military targets and targets for assassination. So civilians, basically, scientists and stuff like that, and their families. So they've been in the ground for a long time, but they get pulled out and others come in and they get pulled out. You're not supposed to keep people there long term. So they've been on the ground for a very long time. And this is what they have done in Libya, Syria, Lebanon, many other countries in Central South America and Africa. Africa is a big subject where the involvement of CIA is still not properly examined and uncovered.
Okay, Sain,
Yeah.
ask your question.
Yeah. First, I agree with you that there is some kind of secular fundamentalism where the interests of the state are imposed on the people, and the people can't say, hey, I believe that there is a higher power. What my state commands me to do, orders me to do, may not be, let's say, rewarded in another world, etc. They don't have the right to say that, especially in an atheistic country, let's say like the Soviet Union or whatever. I understand that there is that kind of fundamentalism, but at the same time, within a country like a Christian country or Buddhist country or a Muslim country, somebody can't say, well, I do think that there is a higher power, but I don't believe that that higher power is the same thing as your Allah, your God, or whatever. I'm a deist or I'm an agnostic or, basically, I don't think there's a scripture that really came from a higher power, but I still believe in a higher power. So leave me alone. I don't want to fight in your war. Do they have the right to say that? I don't think they do. During Iran-Iraq war, I don't think people could have said, look, I'm a Baha'i or I'm a Zoroastrian or, I'm a Buddhist. I don't want to fight in your war. I don't think they had that kind of right. So to buy into a binary vision where the fight is between Islam and Christianity or Islam versus Westernization is wrong. There are so many different possibilities, combinations, permutations of different things. And I don't know. For instance, as you may know, the religion of Baha'ism emerged out of Iran, but it's not practiced. It's illegal in Iran. And this is, None of this justifies bombing anybody, any place in Iran. I'm not saying that. But at the same time, many conflicts are inside these countries, and I don't think uh, giving the authority to Sharia is likely to find a permanent solution to any of these conflicts. What are your views?
I agree with most of what you said, but the end is I don't agree with it. We have unprecedented examples in Muslim history from West Africa to all the way to Thailand and Malaysia, where when Sharia was the dominant form, the expected standard, those things that we're talking about, minority rights, women's rights, they weren't at the state that they are now. I'm not saying everything was perfect. What I'm saying is, for example, let's look at the Ottoman Empire, which is vastly studied because they were huge and they were one of the longest lasting empires in human history. In the Ottoman Empire, you could be whatever minority you wanted to be. You were considered a millet, or in Arabic, millah. A millah means an identifiable community. And it didn't matter what you called yourself or what you could have been Baha'i, but Baha'i wasn't like there in that region. It was, more like you said in Iran. But there were many, many, many subsects of Islam also, things that were heterodox, not orthodox, completely against some of the source teachings of Islam. But the Turks never suppressed them. They were considered a millah. And in a millah, you govern yourself according to how you want to. So the state, the sultan, could not interfere in your religious freedom. The only thing you owed the state or the sultan was the taxes. And I consider a degree of loyalty that didn't turn into insurrection. So those two things, you couldn't insurrect and you couldn't refuse to pay taxes. And there were many, many minority Muslim sects that the Ottomans could have erased, they could have made illegal, but they didn't because they didn't believe that. And their reasoning for that, their scholars, their Ottoman scholars, the religious scholars, said we do not believe in an Islam that does that. Even if you disagree with the Quran, even if you disagree with the Sunnah, even if you disagree with whether you're Shia or Sunni or anything, we do not do that. We do not practice that. There was a practical reason why they didn't practice that, and that was because to preempt insurrection. Because in the pre-modern world, the worst thing in the Muslim world or anywhere in Europe, Africa, anywhere, was insurrections, because they took so much away from the economy, they created imbalance, and then bordering empires would look at insurrections and then intervene. So insurrections were extremely dangerous. And to preempt that, the Ottomans practiced a type of tolerance never practiced ever again. In the United States, we say freedom of press, freedom of religion, this and this and that. There's so many analytical studies of what that really means in practice. There are things Christians, Jews, Muslims cannot do because it's against the law. But if you transported those communities back into the Ottoman Empire, they could do those things. They had their own judges, their own court systems. They had their own family law. They had their own trade policies. So financially, economically, socially, religiously, they felt completely free. And this is not I'm saying this. This is Moses Maimonides saying this, the greatest Jewish philosopher of the Jewish world. This is Thomas Aquinas alluding to this, one of the greatest philosophers of the Christian world. This is travel writers coming from Europe, some of them women, saying, oh my God, why do women have so much freedom in the Ottoman lands, but when I go back to England or France, they don't? A lot of this has been documented. And so I disagree with that final point that Sharia does not. This guy right here, he wrote Humanism in Islam. He was a long-term ambassador to the Muslim world. His name is Marcel Boissard. He felt it obligatory to write a book on the humanistic aspects of Islam. And in this book, he makes a point that if Sharia were to come back, if the Muslims were in charge of, if Sharia was in charge and the Muslims were in charge, they would resolve A, B, C, D, E conflict. Because according to their religion, it would preempt those conflicts and social ills. He never converted to Islam. He didn't have that type of loyalty to Islam. And he wrote that. And a lot of people concur with that. So I disagree that Sharia does not resolve lots of the problems.
Okay, so David, you're unmuted, so go ahead.
Okay. This is ultra simplistic, but what role does patriarchal the patriarchy is
Yeah,
it
thank you.
yeah, the rule of men, the what role does that play in, and how did women end up like all, universally not playing an equal role or viewed as in a um just another person, as opposed to having the same equal rights as men. Uh, and I know certainly in some areas of the Middle East, it's it's been a problem, and certainly the U.S. and all of the Western powers, women at one point, as you know, were deprived of rights of possession or secession, all sorts of things. But if you could answer that for me, I'd really appreciate that.
I can't grab the book behind me that's about this because it'll collapse all the other books.
Okay.
But there's a book called The Tao of Islam, written by Sakiko Murata. She was a Japanese scholar of Islam. I think at some point she taught at Sunni. But I'm not even sure if she's still alive. I think she is. But she wrote a real good book. It's called The Tao of Islam. It's about gender relationships. And in that book, she goes into the Quran and the Hadith. Those are the two main sources of Islam. And she focuses on the words that the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and the terms that Allah in the Quran uses when he describes or talks about women specifically. And so the greatest names of Allah are Ar-Rahman and Ar-Rahim, the two names, the merciful, the beneficent. Those words, those names are rooted in Rahma, the word Rahma, which means mercy. Allah then specifically uses that root to describe wombs, Rahm, wombs. And then Allah says that whoever does not respect the womb or disassociates themselves from the womb, a positive relationship with the womb, has disassociated themselves from me, from the divine. No scripture on the planet describes women in such a rooted, sacred way. So the main point is women in Islam are considered part of a protected group. To counter the long-standing oppression of men, economic and personal rights for women were enshrined in Sharia. What rights? Before Islam, in that area where Islam came, and in other areas, women couldn't own property. They couldn't dispense with property. They didn't have inheritance. They didn't have the right to divorce. They didn't have the right to conduct business, own a business. Islam gave all those rights. Then there's social rights and personal rights that Islam gave them. Female infanticide was banned. Can't kill women because they're women. They could exercise a certain degree of power within the family structure, a certain degree of power in the communal structure. A lot of where the concept of ijma, which is consensus, comes from an example of women telling the Prophet, telling the Prophet, maybe this should happen, this should happen, this should happen, and the Prophet reacting to it very positively, therefore making ijma, consensus from women, a legal thing in Sharia. Where else would you find that in the 600s? And so many things about Islam are shunned over, and this language about equality and women don't have. Much of the oppression of women is due to cultural reasons. For example, the Taliban. A woman investigative reporter, her first name was Sarah, but I forgot her last name. I've been trying to look for the article. She's a Pakistani journalist. She embedded herself within the Taliban for many months, and she asked Taliban commanders, the Quran says this, but you guys do this. How do you reconcile it? And the commanders admit, we're wrong, but because this is our tribal belief, it's hard to change it. And so even people who say, who tell the world that they run according to Islam, the Taliban, even their high-level people admit, no, we know this isn't Islam, but it's part of our culture. So why is that omitted from the narrative when describing women living in Afghanistan? Why is that eliminated? I know the reason why. So women are very valued in Islam. The Quran makes it clear that if you're at war with women, you're at war with the divine. A really beautiful tradition of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, is if a woman dies giving birth to a child, and the child dies or lives or whatever, if the child dies too, their souls go up, right? And on the day of judgment, the umbilical cord of the soul of the child connects to the mother and pulls the mother away from everything bad in the afterlife and pulls her towards heaven. A beautiful way of showing the relationship that God, the divine, which is neither male nor female, has with specifically women. There is no such thing for men. Women are considered mujahideen, and they die the death of a martyr if they die making hajj, but not for men. For women specifically. There are many, 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 many things like that in Islam that refute this false dichotomy of the war between men and women in Islam. It's culture, much of it is misrepresentation by the West, but it's unfortunate. I want to end answering a question by saying that Imam Abu Hanifa, which is the founder of the biggest law school, biggest form of Sharia, biggest fiqh school in the Muslim world, stated that each major town in the Muslim lands should have at least minimum one female judge who oversees the protection of women's rights in Islam. That's like the Pope from the 1100s, or Imam Abu Hanifa passed away in 699. Let's say the 8th century, a Pope says, no, we need women in high authority. Judges are the highest authority in Islamic law. There's no one higher than a judge. This Pope, imagine a Pope saying, no, we need to appoint at least one female judge per town, at least, who will oversee that the men don't abuse the women when conducting the affairs of the community. Can you imagine that? He's the biggest, most influential legal scholar in the Muslim world, Imam Abu Hanifa. And he said that about women. All that crap, fake crap about women that is believed here, all of it's crap. All of it's fake.
Well,
Thank you very much.
Ghanim, thank you so much. It's 7:30. I know that you had to leave around that time.
I have to pray Maghrib prayer, the sunset prayer. I'm actually very late for it.
Yeah.
Yes, you
Thank
are.
you.
Because it's dark outside. I see. We want to thank you so much. We recorded this, and we can share, share it with other people. I hope that's okay.
Absolutely fine.
And also, I just want to remind everybody that Saturday, I'm just going to remove Saturday is No King's Day. And if you haven't signed up, make sure you go to peacesi.org. If somebody wants to put the sign up for the, there'll be a place to sign up there. You've gotten lots of emails, I'm sure, about it. Make sure that you tell your friends. Peace Action has been working with many other groups. Eileen, do you want to say anything before we leave?
I just want to thank you, Ghanim, for being here tonight and for answering our questions, for trying to, broaden our perspective. And we are very grateful to you for being here tonight. And thank you, everyone, for joining. And what you presented to us is an opportunity to seek further for ourselves also, and to really try and understand it's not simple, it's complex. But thank you for your honesty and your sincerity, and we consider you a friend and a supporter of the peace movement. And again, thank you for being here.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me. On such short notice, too.
Yeah.
Well,
Can you hold that book up again?
I'm not sure which one. What? Humanism and Islam?
Yeah. Doing that. Yeah. Thank you.
Humanism in what?
it reviews the literature about Iran in the West.
Who's the author?
The author is Hossein Nazari. I can send this in an email if you want.
Okay, that would be really good.
Yeah.
Thanks so much.
And thank you, Sally, for
Have a bibliography you want to pass around? We could
All the books.
share the recording.
That
Yeah,
would
all the
be
books, all the
excellent.
books that I used as sources and that I mentioned, I'll make a list of that.
That would
Okay,
be
that's
good
great.
because I think people want to read more.
And also the U.S. Institute of Peace has a great website on Iran where they go through all these things.
And it's still up there after
Yep, it's
I took it over?
I can't believe it, but it's still up there. Yes.
Okay,
Not,
that's
not for long after this.
Well, much
There's the
appreciated.
modern thing taking place.
Mm,
Much appreciated, everybody. If
indeed.
so, Ghanim, I know you have to leave. If anybody has any questions about what's going on Saturday, I'll stick around for a little while.
Thanks again, Ghanim. This really been a good session.
Thank you. Thank you for joining.